Colonel Gardiner, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm good. Appreciate
Merry
you having me.
Christmas. Absolutely, man. Thanks for coming tonight. It's the holiday. It's 2 days after Christmas here.
Yeah.
Any big New Year's resolutions?
You always just try to be better in what you do every day. Just find something you can be better in.
Don't say that. You need to say something real, like I'm going to floss every day. Like I'm going to stop lying to my dentist.
Yeah. No, that's true. Like really just trying to be better every day. You've probably heard the 1%. If I can just get 1% better every day, then every day is I think the accomplishments you can do, the things you can do better.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, right before we got going, that you're big into CrossFit. I actually really enjoyed. I'm not a big lifter, right? Obviously, I have skinny little arms, but I got into CrossFit when I couldn't do jiu-jitsu over COVID. And I found that to be one of those types of things where it's so measurable and it's so, you can see this clear improvement and just pushing to increase every day. And I became obsessed with it. It was really, and again, I don't do it up here, but it's really cool. It's cool when you can quantify, hey, look, I got a little bit better today.
Yeah. CrossFit definitely works for me that way, but just staying active, I notice my days that I work out, they're better than when I don't. I teach spin classes for the YMCA in the mornings, and then I do CrossFit in the afternoon. And the days that I am specifically with CrossFit, different day. Definitely a different day. My thoughts are cleaner. My thoughts are better. My thoughts are more succinct. It definitely it helps trying to produce a better person, a better me.
Yeah, Okay, first off, are you in the Y off Chinden?
So I teach at the brand new Y at Eagle Road in Amity.
Oh, awesome! We go down to the Y on Chinden. It's pretty awesome.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I was gonna say, like, I'll see you at the spin class. Spin class is a hard one. I actually used to live at the base of a mountain, and I would the only thing I would do, I didn't like doing long rides around where there are a lot of cars, but I would ride up the mountain, just up and down the mountain. Like, God bless it, man.
Yeah,
it's a great time. Anyway, listen. So again, awesome that you have good New Year's resolution. Mine is really just to be slightly less of an idiot, which is an ongoing process. And if I can get 1% better per year, I'm very happy. If I got another 50 years in me and I'm 50% less of an idiot when I meet my end, like, I will be happy there. So it's, it's a long haul.
Yeah.
ISP has been one of the agencies that I have never connected with. I have spoken with, obviously, sheriff's offices and police departments. ISP is analogous to different highway districts or highway patrol systems. You guys function statewide, and you fill a gap in inter-county law enforcement. But again, I don't know a ton about it. Like, can you explain just kind of the broader picture of what ISP is and how that helps with law enforcement throughout the state?
Sure. If you look around the country, you'll see the state agency, the state law enforcement agency, typically they have different titles. Here in Idaho, we are a state police. In Utah, they're the highway patrol. There's state patrols. Washington is the state patrol. But so with those names come different responsibilities. In 1939, when ISP was created, we were specifically given the name of a state police rather than a highway patrol. Because when you hear the words highway patrol, you think of, well, they're on the highway and they're patrolling. But with the state police agency, and the way Idaho code is written is we have the same police powers that any elected sheriff. And the code is very specific to that. And so the state trooper that's out working on the road has the exact same police powers in all those jurisdictions. I wouldn't say that ISP is really any different than any other police agency. Obviously, you have your cities, you have your counties, then you have the state. We like to see ourselves as that next resource. So if a major crime occurs in a city, we obviously the chief of police and the city police department are the ones that are going to handle that. If they need help from the counties, they reach out. But oftentimes they will get into a situation where they are absolutely consumed with resources and they now need help from the state, and we're the ones that they call. And so we really pride on ourselves on being ready when we get that call. For about 5 years, ISP is broken into 6 different districts around the state, and each district is managed by a district commander, and that's the rank of captain. And so they're there. I was the district commander here in the Boise area for about 5 years, and so I was really the conduit in this district. There are 10 counties. I was the conduit for those 10 sheriffs. So if they needed anything, it didn't matter if it was 2 a.m. They're on the phone with me saying, "Hey, Bill, we've got fires breaking out. Is there any way we can get resources?" In some of the smaller jurisdictions, some of the small cities, they don't have the resources to investigate even a homicide. And so I can't tell you how many times I'd get a call in the middle of the night from a chief of police in a small jurisdiction, and they'd say, "Hey, we just had a homicide. Is there any way your team could come handle this?" We're there. So we really pride ourselves on being ready when that call comes.
So you guys fill the gap in manpower and then even specialties within specific areas that, like, if you're a small county or you're a small department, and again, I don't know, this is a question. Essentially what you're saying is, look, there may not be the frequency of a specific type of crime, like a homicide, where it's like, listen, we don't have the resources to actually go after crime and investigate and deal with this appropriately, but ISP does. Can you drop in and help us here?
Yeah. And sometimes they may have an active, for instance, a narcotics investigation. I won't get into too many specifics, but there's one currently that we're working that I should say we're assisting, because the small agency, they have a detective, and that detective starts getting into this drug case, and pretty soon they realize, oh my word, this is bigger than I thought this was going to get to. We don't have the resources. They've now tied some of these things to cartel work, and now they need more resources. So then they reach out and say, hey, we're going to keep this. We're going to be the lead agency, but we need some more resources. Can you come help us? And so we get calls like that all the time. Now, ISP we are not just reactionary and we're just sitting back waiting for a call. We also have our own detectives. We have our troopers. We have all those out working that are out proactively looking for crime as well. But the one thing that we are statutorily responsible for is that when the locals call, we're there to help.
When you say you're out working crimes, if you guys are the entire state, like, where do you focus your investigations? And like, if somebody calls 911, I presume it goes first to the local jurisdictions, and then, they can reach out to you. But like, where do you focus your attention as you have, detectives and whatnot?
Yeah, great question. So I mentioned the 6 different districts.
Yes.
Each one of those has a patrol division, and they have an investigations division that are filled with detectives. And so you have those two working together. And a case could start as simple as something as a trooper that makes a traffic stop on the side of the road. And then based on what they see or the criminal element that they run into, they're now on the phone with one of our detectives saying, hey, here's what I've got. This happens an awful lot with, for instance, like human trafficking. A trooper may stop. We had a case in northern Idaho where a trooper stops a car. It's filled with children. Some of those children have been beaten. Some of them are barely responsive. And the trooper, very smart, starts asking questions, realizes there's no parents in the car. Pretty clear that these kids are being trafficked and about ready to be sold. Immediately get our detectives involved. And, I can say that trooper did, some amazing things. And even though that happened a number of years ago, that trooper still has a relationship with some of those kids. And all of that started from somebody violating, an infraction, and the trooper asking the right questions. And then all of a sudden our detectives get involved. And then the case gets even bigger from there.
Human trafficking is a horrendous crime that has really been brought into sharp relief. One of the problems, there are many problems with the national security as it relates to our border. Had Representative Hill in here several times last year and this year, and he talked frequently about, he went down to see Eagle Pass himself down in Texas, and really recognized that there's this crisis around what seems to be a humanitarian emphasis, which is, hey, like, we need to let these children in, or we need to take care of these children. But what you find out then is, if you're an adult that wants to cross without questions asked, you just need to grab a kid. Could be your kid, could not be your kid, doesn't matter. But you can get across, and you have a much higher probability of not being turned around or denied resources or financial support, whatever it might be. If you're a lone adult versus if you have a kid, you have a much higher probability, and that increased the human trafficking of young children across the U.S. border. It's coming up from a lot of different angles. Obviously, our new border czar has made a lot of commentary about the horrible instances that he's personally witnessed. How is that relating to Idaho? I mean, you bring up this one particular example of human trafficking. Is this a common thing? Is it common enough that it's on your radar? Is it very infrequent? What's the relationship with human traffickers in Idaho?
Well, I'm sure you recognize that one of the governor's top priorities is human trafficking. I think he realizes that this problem started at the federal level, and this didn't originate here in Idaho. But unfortunately, Idaho is now having to deal with this. And so he has not only given me the direction, but he's provided resources in order to fight this scourge. What's interesting in Idaho with human trafficking, I think when people hear human trafficking, they think of the sexual element behind it and the sex crimes that take place. But honestly, most of our cases have to do with the agricultural industry, where people are brought across the border and they're essentially slave labor. And they're told, you will stay at this farm or this dairy and you will work here until, the cost of bringing you across is paid off. And they're just servitude forever because they never get it paid off. And so there are, again, I won't go into too many details, but there are several cases we're actively working right now where it's not a sexual element, but it's basically slave labor in Idaho's agricultural industry. I'd say that's where most of our human trafficking cases come from.
Gosh, that's rough. In these cases, who's the perpetrator, right? Because we know who the victim is. Are these individuals who are being trafficked by a larger organization that are then essentially presenting them as legal labor to the farm owners or the farm managers? I mean, who's responsible for this?
So all the intelligence points to the cartels that are doing this. And I think when people hear the word cartel, they automatically think of the drug trade. That's what they're known for. That's what they do. But they're in it to make money. That's their entire goal. And so whatever avenue that is, if they could make enough money selling fake Oakley sunglasses, they're going to do it, right? If they can make money selling people, they're going to do it. If they're making money selling drugs, they're going to do it. And in this case, they realize that they can, and they're very good at masking themselves as a legitimate private entity. And then when you really pull everything back and you pull these layers back, you realize who you're dealing with. You're dealing with the cartel. So in some cases, yes, Idaho farmers are being tricked into think that they're bringing people on to work at their farms. Legally, they think they're following the law, but it turns out that they're not. And so that is the case oftentimes.
God, that's really rough. There's a problem in general with our agricultural sector, right? In that there are, as you're pointing out, illegal people working in the ag industry. Like, how do we distinguish between, or is there a way to distinguish? Is there a benefit to even distinguish between people that are here illegally but law-abiding individuals that are here to work and contribute, and people here that are here under force, right? Or from a law enforcement standpoint, it's like, look, both are bad, right? Like, both are bad for sure. If you're here illegally, you're a criminal just by definition. Like, there's no disagreeing with that. But there are people that do come here illegally in good faith, as much good faith as you could, saying like, I'm trying to contribute and, get a job and make revenue and offer service, labor, as it were. Is there a way to distinguish between those, or does ISP just look at them analogously?
Well, there's a legal way and a legal process to get into the country to work. Right. I personally, I've lived my whole life in Idaho, spent some of my time in my teenage years working on farms, and worked side by side with legal migrants who simply followed the growing seasons around, and they made their money that way, and then would certainly return to their home countries. Sure. So I have personal experience from working with those kind of folks, and they hardworking. That's all they want to do is make money for their families. There is definitely a legal process and a legal path in order to do that. Then all of a sudden you move into a different category where people either by themselves or they pay somebody to bring them across illegally. And then you have those who are all of a sudden brought in from the cartels, and the minute that the cartel has them, they now own them, right? And then so now they enter into the slave trade. And I think the governor recognizes that it is multifaceted. There is no one solution fits everything. And so you've probably heard, he sent a handful of our troopers to the border. I think we've gone 3 or 4 times now. We've just had a group get back recently. And their whole goal there, this last trip, was to work with Texas troopers because they see it every day. They not only have the skill sets and the tools to identify when somebody's being human trafficked, but they know the questions to ask. They know what all the key indicators are as they're making these traffic stops. Our troopers for the last, I think they were there for 2 weeks, worked very closely with that. They then bring that information back and we share it with anybody who will listen. I was at the Sheriff's Association meeting 3 weeks ago, had an audience with all 44 sheriffs, And that was the first thing I said was, we've got troopers coming back. We want to share this information. Please schedule time so that we can get into your agencies and share what we've learned. So that's the first step, is going down and actually seeing it where they're actually crossing, what Texas is doing to combat that, and then bring all that information back, because there isn't one solution that fits all of this. And then it's so important for law enforcement to work together. I can tell you that Idaho is very unique in this. Whether you're the city chief or the county sheriff or the director of the state police, we all work together. If you look at any major crime in Idaho, any of them that have occurred over the last 3 or 4 years, not one agency has solved that by themselves. We all work together to do it. We just don't have the resources. I think I saw an interesting stat that said once a city reaches about 500,000 people, you all of a sudden get big city problems. Mm-hmm. And the statistics show that. Crime rates show that. And the influx of people moving into Idaho is significantly outweighing the influx of police officers that are being hired in Idaho. And so
I'm sorry. I didn't know. I moved here. I didn't know I was messing things up.
Part of the problem.
Yeah, right.
No, but you can see that as a law enforcement community statewide, we are in a position where egos cannot get in the way. We are in this together, and we have to figure out a way to overcome those big city problems that are starting to come into the state.
Wow, that's a lot. So again, ISP being the functioning agency where it says, okay, look, you 10 different counties in a specific area. You may not want to increase funding to your specific agencies. So when you have that one-off, for instance, a drug bust that goes to like a big cartel investigation, that individual county all of a sudden has the resources, right? Or, we don't want to have all the different detectives. So you guys fill this gap of saying, okay, when you guys need help, just call us. And that allows the taxpayers in those areas to not have a massive tax burden, because they don't have to have a full-time, like cartel investigation unit, right? Because we might get one thing a year or one thing every couple of years. And then that's when we need the resources, but there's no point in having people pay for this full-time person sitting here. And you want somebody who's good, 100% good, 100% specialized, 100% competent and up to date. And that's a big piece that ISP brings to it. Now, who funds you then? Because obviously, if you're filling this gap for the average citizen, the average Idahoan like I am, which is like, look, maybe I don't want my county to be funding this full-time hyper-specialized resource, and I would really like ISP to be able to pop in and fill that gap when necessary. Who funds you?
Yeah, so we're like every state agency where we go to the legislature every year and we lay out our budget and we say, hey, here's what we're asking for, here's what we're requesting, and then the legislators get together and figure out, okay, we've got this pot of money, how are we going to divide it amongst all these state agencies? And so we fill that role as a state agency.
Gotcha. Yeah. I did have Ron Nate on here recently, and he's very conservative. Obviously, he's president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, and he had articulated some concerns that he had when he was a legislator, because he was also an economics professor, and had some different ideas about, what needs of ISP were and what the responsibility of the legislature was to fulfill those needs or fulfill those asks as they were, because again, there's theoretically a distinction there. What are the needs, right? He had said something about, a bunch of, I think, interceptor like Mustangs or something. There's also a helicopter comment. And again, I don't know anything about helicopters. I don't know anything about Mustangs. I'm a Toyota guy. But it's like the reality is that somebody said, they're like, well, you know why ISP asked for a helicopter? And it's because they were borrowing it from the Guard, right? And they have a need for a helicopter. And again, I don't know what the agreement is with the Guard. I do know when you have, for instance, traveling nurses. I had Brad Turpin, who's the CEO of the Emmett Hospital, in recently. He said, listen, when you have a need that you're filling with temporary things, it's an astronomical cost. So he was like, you have traveling nurses that come in, they cost an enormous amount as opposed to like an in-house full-time nurse that can fill that need, right? And I wondered immediately, I'm like, is that kind of the situation with like the helicopter? You have this need, you're borrowing it or renting it or whatever the agreement is. And that's probably not a great way to do things. If I need a spatula, every week and I have to keep borrowing it from my neighbor, it's like, why don't I just get my own spatula? So what's the thinking, or what was the reasoning behind like, hey, let's try to get a helicopter that's ISP's helicopter? What's the need for it? And then what was the cost by not doing it?
Sure. So I can tell you that was, I don't know, 3 legislative sessions ago
Gotcha.
when that was happening. So it was a different colonel, different director. And I'm not here to second guess another director, but I can tell you facts, right, of what I remember occurring back then. So interesting with the helicopter. First of all, I see government as they should be problem solvers. And I see my role as a director as somebody who brings forward problems and then approaches the legislature and say, hey, we have a problem. It's X.
Right.
Here's a potential solution. I'm offering it out there. And oftentimes legislators will say, ooh, I see where you're at, but what about this as a solution to that problem? And that's the idea of government coming together, the branches of government coming together and trying to solve problems, right?
So you have a problem theoretically. Hey, we have a need for a helicopter in specific situations.
So let's
get together.
Yeah, let's talk about the helicopter. Yeah. So the helicopter actually came from those 44 sheriffs that approached us and said, we have a problem. When it comes to search and rescue, we don't have the resources to do it. And the sheriffs didn't want one of their own to like manage a statewide resource. And so the Sheriff's Association approached us and said, I think that the state should be the one to manage this to help us as we are doing search and rescue. And we saw that as, you're right, that is a problem. I'll tell you one of the most heartbreaking things, and this still happens, when a loved one goes missing. Maybe they're off hiking in one of Idaho's beautiful mountains, and they end up lost, and we would send a drone up to see if we can find them. And there's a handful of times where we have found them. We've recognized that we found their lifeless body. They've fallen from a cliff of some kind, and they're there. The worst thing that a sheriff has to do is tell family, hey, we're not rescuing somebody. We're now recovering somebody. And because of the weather and because we don't have the resources, we'll recover their body in the spring. That legitimately happens in this state because we don't have those resources. And so the sheriffs are the ones that said, hey, we have a legitimate need and a problem here. In fact, if you go back and look at some of the committee hearings when we made that request 3 years ago, the Sheriff's Association showed up and they've said all this. They said these things.
So it was ISP responding to a request of the 44 sheriffs saying, hey, can you help us fill this gap? You're the agency that fills our gaps. It's something that we all need. I may not need it this year. I may not need it in 5 years, but I may need it in year 6. And I'm going to need it in year 6. And he might need it next year. So can you just be in charge of and maintain this thing that we acknowledge we need in search and rescue issues?
Yeah. And that's really what I think what ISP did at the time was we brought a problem to the legislature and said, hey, the sheriffs acknowledge this is a problem. We acknowledge it's a problem. I'll tell you, I've been with ISP for 26 years. And throughout that time, there have been several instances where we are the lead agency on a manhunt. And we're trying to find somebody who's either shot a bank teller and they're on the run, or they've escaped from prison and they're on the run, and ISP is now responsible to chase them down. There's 2 instances over the last probably 5 years where those manhunts have happened in southern Idaho. And because we don't have that resource, the director at the time made a call to Utah and said, hey, is there any way that you can fly your helicopter up to help us with this manhunt? And they've never said no. The Utah Highway Patrol has always graciously sent their pilot and their helicopter to help us find our criminals. They've never asked for a penny in return. They've never said, can you pay for our pilots? Can you pay for the fuel? They've just graciously provided that helicopter to come there. And so I think ISP's perspective in the past has been, especially when the sheriffs approached us with the idea, the idea was, it's probably a good thing for ISP to be able to share that resource and be the one to kind of help with all of those things. So it isn't strictly search and rescue, but there are times when manhunts occur. We're very limited with what we can use with the Guard. The Guard cannot, there's certain statutes that do not allow the National Guard to use their equipment in a law enforcement capacity. So they're really talking recovery, search and rescue, but Gotcha. That's if they're available. I know sometimes the Guard will classify a training exercise as an assist of some kind, but for the most part, using Black Hawk helicopters with the Guard, it's just not an option. There's a couple of different outfits out of Montana that if they have a bird available, we can call and rent it from them. And even the company that we use up there sometimes won't necessarily charge us, but that's if it's available. The other one I can think of where we used in a manhunt was, I think it was either King County, Washington, or Spokane PD. But again, it's an outside of our state's resource that they're saying, hey, we'll help you in what you're needing.
So Idaho has a need, either in a manhunt capacity or search and rescue capacity, at least, right? And there may be others that we're not articulating, but those are two really clear needs. And we currently and in the past rely on our surrounding states and the generosity of those states. And, just to say, hey, we can't fix this ourselves. We need you guys to help. And they're like, yeah, we have the equipment. Here you go. Yeah. And they just keep handing it over. So at some point, the Sheriff's Association just said, hey, can we stop asking Utah or Washington or Montana or whoever to loan us their stuff? Can we just get because we obviously have a need, and we can only rely on, good neighbor faith for so long.
Sure. And like I said in the beginning, I do believe that state agencies and legislators work together to solve problems. And so in this case, ISP brings forward the problem and says, hey, here's a potential solution. And I'm fine with the fact that the legislature got together and made their decision and said, we don't see it as much of a problem, or that's not the solution. So let's come up. That was government working, and it's fine.
Right.
But now let's talk about the Mustangs. Let's move to the Mustangs.
Okay.
Right?
But the bottom line is they came to a determination. That was the whole point of the helicopter, right?
Yeah.
And whether or not people think the helicopter was the right move or the wrong move, irrelevant in my mind, because it's like, okay, you can come up with your own idea about whether or not we should have had that, whether we should keep relying on other states. That's fine. But there is a real need. This was not like you guys just rolled up to, a convention and somebody had a helicopter and you're like, oh, let's get a helicopter of our own. It's like, no. We have a need. This was a need. It was a statewide need. It was going to be owned by a statewide agency that could obviously supply it in all kinds of different places. Can I tell you something before we go to Mustangs?
Yeah.
Okay. When I was like 10, do you remember that movie Alive?
Yes. The soccer team?
So it turns rugby.
Yeah.
They were Uruguayan and flying over the Andes, and they crash. Okay. I saw that when I was 10. I was like obsessed with the movie for some reason too. It's like they're eating each other. I was like, this is so crazy. It was like Matt in fourth grade. And man, I saw they made a new one last night that Netflix apparently knew when I was 10. I was like obsessed with it, and it put it into our feed, and my wife and I watched it. And it was, again, it's one of those human stories of like, how bad do you want this? Like, how badly do you want to stay alive? And it was very, very well done. But again, search and rescue, because they had search and rescue going out. And then they eventually were like, we did our 10-day obligatory, thing. We can't find them, whatever. We'll come back in the spring when they know they're going to be gone. And then two savages like march out. But when you're talking about helicopters for search and rescue, that's what they brought in eventually to rescue the guys.
That's what it was. Yeah. And I don't know if people realize, but outside of Alaska, Idaho has the most wilderness area in the in the United States. Like we're filled with forest land. We're filled with it. And people like to go off and explore that. And you can't blame a sheriff for saying, man, I really need a resource, because they're the ones who are ultimately responsible for search and rescue. Statutorily, the sheriffs are responsible for that. So you can't blame them for reaching out to the state saying, hey, we need help in what we're doing. And I think that year ISP was the lightning rod for the idea. However, maybe it wasn't the right time.
Yeah, sure.
Whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Right. I wasn't there. I don't know if you were there. Like we were not the ones that proposed it, but the fact is that there is an issue. I have a dear friend, Drew Whalen, he's one of my board members for the Truth and Media Foundation. He maintains the chugger system in the Owyhees, and he's an older dude. He's in his 70s, and he's schlepping all kinds of equipment up to maintain the chuggers for wildlife watering and stuff. And if anything happened to him, I would want Idaho. Like, he's a dear friend of mine. I would want Idaho to puff up its chest and be like, hey, we are there. Like, here, we're not sending one, we're sending 2 helicopters to find this guy. And I could imagine that, don't want to imagine him, but I can imagine statewide people do engage. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about this state is that we have the open lands and we have the trails. And that's a really important thing that we should maintain and take advantage of. But that also comes with risk.
Sure.
It's not like it's just innocuous, like, oh, great. It's like the Boise River. Everybody likes the Boise River, but there's an incredible amount of maintenance that goes into that to make sure the Boise River's safe. People don't get, swept under in sweepers and the risks on a river and a body of water are really, I did a lot of kayaking in Alaska. It's like, they are really substantial and people don't realize how much effort goes into them.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so Mustangs. Let's hit the Mustangs.
Yeah,
by the way, the new version of Alive, it is in a foreign language, but they do have great captions and dubbing, and it's called Society of the Snow.
Oh,
it was like a 2-hour film, and like it was a fantastic movie.
So you're recommending that?
I would recommend it. It was it's gonna make you think. Like it was one of those. The original movie of Alive did not really explore. First off, it didn't portray the actual escape that the two individuals managed.
Did you read the book?
I did not read the book. Did you read the book?
I read it a long time ago. Yeah.
Man, I didn't even know there was a book.
That's what,
of course, there's
a
book.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it also, it glossed over the moral and ethical dilemma in the original film. It didn't portray it as deeply as like you had to make a decision every single bite you took of your friend, or like who was the one in charge of, essentially harvesting the meat. Like, and again, it was one of those books. Anyway, or excuse me, one of those films. Society of the Snow. So Mustangs.
Okay. So
God, that got dark real fast. I'm sorry. You talk about search and rescue. What do you want me to do?
Yeah, right. That's where your mind went.
God, it was last night. It was like 12 hours ago I was watching this film. Anyway, it's on Netflix.
So let's talk about Mustangs. So again, let's go back a couple of years. And well, actually, let's talk a little bit about how state agencies procure items. First of all, there's a process to go through.
Sure.
Statutorily, we use a state contract. So I can't, if my buddy owns a car lot, I can't just go buy cars from him, right? And help my buddy out that way. Like, it can't. And so there's a process that takes place when you're talking specifically things like vehicles. Once a year, all the car manufacturers will send out nationwide to all their police agencies and say, these are the cars that are available. And they've already been at a contracted rate, and this is how much they cost. Now, I'm sure everybody remembers when we came out of COVID, there were not many vehicles available. It was hard to find vehicles, right? And so this is how far back we're going in regards to purchasing of Mustangs.
And that was the supply chain issue, right? That was like
massive,
the chips.
Massive,
yeah,
yes. Right. At the time, the primary patrol vehicle was the Dodge Charger. That's now going away. The Dodge Charger now, I believe the next rendition, we can't buy those now because they're only coming out in two-wheel drive electrics. And electric vehicles are real hard for a state police agency.
Sure.
You get in a pursuit and eventually we're running out of
juice.
Juice. So those are, for the most part, are not going to be the primary patrol vehicles that I think you'll see police agencies. Most police agencies now, in fact, the only options really are Ford Explorers or Tahoes or Dodge Durangos. Those are kind of the only they're not really a sedan that's out there available now.
If I may, and I don't mean to interrupt. So the shift to a larger SUV is not one of like, I want a bigger, better car. It's literally the smaller vehicle, again, Durango compared to a Charger. Durango's much bigger. The smaller vehicle actually is no longer available for what we need, and there's not an analogous vehicle that we can really use.
Yeah, there's not. So if you look at because again, they have to be very specific vehicles. They have to be a patrol-rated vehicle, which means they have a certain suspension, they have a certain motor, they have to have certain things in order to be a patrol vehicle. You can imagine the liability that any police agency would be in if they put their officer. And I know you're a Toyota guy, but if they put your officer in a Prius and sent him out to go do patrol work, where now you have to go 140 miles an hour to chase someone down or to get to the scene of a crash to save a life, or whatever the case may be, and that car not be able to maintain the stress that's required that it's going to be put under, there's a lot of liability, and you've just put this employee in danger, right? So you genuinely need a car that is a patrol-rated car. They're made to go fast. They're made to take bumps. They're made to go through a median. They're made to kind of get beat up a little bit.
And it's, again, sorry to interrupt, but just the point, like, you're not just putting the employee at risk. You're putting the person in the car that's like on fire at risk.
Oh, sure.
Right? Like, it is not, and again, I don't mean to take away from that point, but there's so much commentary about like, oh, we read, for instance, with the jail system, it's like, the more crowded jails get, the more difficult it gets for the corrections officers and jail employees. And people talk about that a lot, but especially in this particular situation, It's like, yeah, if you have an employee that's in a Prius trying to go 130, that's going to be really dangerous for not just the patrol officer, but it's also going to be terrible for the person at the scene if you have a 50% chance that the Prius is going to roll over or that it won't be able to transport itself fast enough to save your life. Sure. That's bad for the citizen. Like, that's bad for the victim.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry.
But it is better for the environment, they say.
Oh my God.
No, I'm just kidding.
I had a Prius before, bro.
You did?
It had a power mode. Yeah. Because I was an in-home SAT tutor. So I would just go to people's houses and I'm like, oh, dude, it was not a bad. Oh my God. I was that guy.
You were the guy that I don't get behind at the red light. I get to the other lane.
Never. Yeah. No, in fact, I would just take my foot off the brake and just let that just idle, just like 20 minutes to get up to 50 miles an hour. Yeah. Anyhow.
So I've set the stage for the purchase, right? We look over the list and we see, okay, these are the cars that are available, and they tell you how many are available, right? So there's limited quantities. So now we're coming out of COVID. We look at our list and think, oh my word, like there's not enough cars here. First of all, our troopers, you can imagine they are, they're in their cars, their office. And so they're on the road every day, all day. Those cars mile out in about 3 to 4 years is how long one of those takes to mile out. We have our guys, we consider a car about 120,000 miles as miled out. Once it creeps over 100,000 miles, we start finding transmissions go out, brakes need to be replaced. Like it almost becomes too expensive to maintain that car. So we go for 120,000 miles is when we mile that car out. We sell it, and then we get the new one to come in. All right, so we know how many cars we need. We have a pretty good idea how many cars are going to be miled out. And as we're looking at the list, we're thinking, oof, there's not much to pick from because the supply chain that you had mentioned. And so as we're looking through things, and again, the price is already set. I can tell you that year, I think I heard somebody mention that we paid $60,000 or $70,000 for a Mustang. That's just not true. They were $48,000. They were cheaper than the Tahoes that we also purchased. The Tahoes were $56,000.
So it's really more the name of the Mustang versus the Tahoe. It's not that the Mustang was like the more expensive vehicle.
Correct. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And the Mustangs were, you had so many patrol rated cars, and you see these cars.
Sure.
Now, the administration at the time, I know that there were some thoughts to what ISP had done in the past. In the 80s, ISP had purchased, it was 6 or 7 IROC Camaros, right? Do you remember IROC Camaros back in the 80s?
Dude.
Right?
You guys had IROCs in the 80s?
Yeah. So ISP purchased a couple of those. And here's what they did with them gave those to
the colonel.
No. They gave those they spread them around the state, and they gave them to high ticket riding guys. So I'm sure you've been driving down the interstate and just had your doors blown off, like somebody screaming past you at 90 or 100 miles an hour. And you always look around and you think, where the heck's the cops at? Right? Like I can't tell you how many people that tell me that they drive from Boise to Salt Lake and they don't see one trooper on the road. I hear that all the time. So what they did in the 80s is they put those cars in certain areas, and their job was go after high speeders. Go after them. And so they kind of modeled that program. Most of those cars were miled out and sold off. We have one in our warehouse from the 80s. It's kind of a relic from the past that we have. And as we were looking at our limited options coming out of COVID, somebody brought up the idea. Well, you remember that we did this before with these Camaros. Mustangs are on here, and they're cheaper than the Tahoes that we could purchase. What if we brought something like that back again? So the administration at the time thought, that's just not a bad idea. Let's give that a try. Let's do it again. So the agency purchased 9 of these Mustangs. Here's the beauty of these Mustangs is not only are they cheaper than what some of our options were, but they last longer because they are only run in the summertime. And so rather than having a car that now is good there for 3 or 4 years, you can get twice the time out of that car. And so we anticipate these Mustangs lasting anywhere from 6 to 8 years. Obviously, they're not very good in the snow, so we don't run them in the snow. But these Mustangs were given to troopers that were specifically given the instructions of go look for really dangerous high-speed drivers.
And that crime in particular is more of a seasonal crime anyway, right? Because you're not in the middle of a snowstorm. You're not going to have somebody rocking like 100 miles an hour, or at least less likely.
Sure.
And if that the snow's going to take care of that person anyway, right? So you have a seasonal crime that you can address in a seasonal manner with this equipment, and you're going to get twice as long out of it.
Yeah. So we call it Idaho's deadliest day, 100 deadliest days, and it runs from Memorial Day through the summer, and then it ends in Labor Day. And that's the summer when kids are out of school. That's when people are playing. That's when people take vacations. That's when people are driving a lot. And so we've identified those cars to really focus on those high traffic areas where a lot of dangerous drivers are. And, that's part of our responsibility is highway safety. And so we saw that as an opportunity, not only to save money because they are cheaper, those cars will last longer, but they look great. They look cool. And so do we get a lot of questions from the public when they're getting fueled up? Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times a trooper that's been issued that car says, I can't even get gas without somebody wanting to take a picture with me with this thing. And I also heard...
And they're cheaper.
They're a cheaper car. Yeah. Yeah. So the idea that they were, nearing $100,000 for a purchase just is not true. It's just not.
What are you doing with the old IROC?
So it's sitting in our warehouse. It's kind of a relic there. We use it in parades sometimes.
That's so cool.
But yeah, we take it to schools. We oftentimes a trooper will hop in that thing, and we do safety talks and presentations at schools all the time. And sometimes it's pretty cool for a trooper to show up in that thing.
Dude, that's man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You got to send me a picture of that.
Yeah.
So bottom line is you guys have a seasonal need, right? A seasonal need when my family's on the road doing vacations, your family's probably on the road doing vacations. You not only have a crime that's committed more frequently within the 100 days, but you have more integration and exposure to that crime with the general populace. And you're like, look, we have this hyper dangerous time frame, and we can address this hyper dangerous time frame with a fast car that can go after these speeders. This car, these Mustangs, are cheaper than the alternative. So if we don't buy the Mustangs, the price tag goes up. They are going to last twice as long because we're using them in a seasonal capacity. And that's the bottom line. It's like if you didn't buy those cars for that reason, you were going to have to buy a more expensive car that was less effective at accelerating and going the same.
Well, and keeping the context in mind, right? Like coming out of COVID, there were not many options. And so what it required the agency to do is get creative and say, okay, we're not going to be able to purchase all the cars we need, but we can supplement a couple of them. Let's look at this. In fact, ISP has 751 cars in our fleet, and 9 of those are Ford Mustangs. So we're talking about something right now that is not even 1% of our entire fleet that we used that we think was a good purchase to not only do the job that it was needed, but it saved money. And then in the time when we were coming out of COVID, we desperately needed to we had to think outside the box. And that was what we thought was good business.
Yeah, 9 out of 750 is, I think, like 1.25% or something really, really small.
Yeah.
Okay, so just bottom line is then this appears to be, it's because it was called a Mustang. Nobody said anything about like the Durangos that were more expensive and bigger. Now, somebody introduced the idea to me, or in fact, I think it was Ron, and he was saying, look, enforcement of the law is one option with decreasing crime, because as a civilian, I care about low crime. Right. And that's important. And you can accomplish this by several different things, right? You can accomplish it by getting all of the criminals off the street, right? And that's going out, enforcing the law, grabbing them, throwing them in jail, whatever it might be. But you can also dissuade crime, right? Make it more damaging, more risky, more, whatever, or you can also make it so that there are more opportunities for people. So the risk benefit analysis is not there for criminals. They're like, well, I could just get this great job, whatever it is. So you can do all kinds of things. But from an ISP standpoint, he was saying, look, you can do enforcement, but you can also essentially disincentivize crime as another manner of reducing crime for the average citizen. And that disincentivizing crime is something that theoretically comes in free, because it's like, okay, if you need the Mustang and you need to go catch the speeder, that's one thing, right? But if you could disincentivize speeding, for instance, let's just use that crime in particular, then you don't have to buy the Mustang. It's like, okay, I like that idea. Like, is there a way that you can actually do that? And again, I don't know, because I've never been in law enforcement. This was just something he mentioned, and it really made me think like, are there options for disincentive structures or deterrent structures that we could engage in more thoroughly to, again, get the end result of lower crime in the area, but also get the benefit of less funding?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to what is the reputation of the law enforcement community in that particular area. And in this case, in the state of Idaho, like what is the reputation? How well does law enforcement work with the prosecuting attorney's offices? So when someone says, hey, if you commit a crime in Idaho, you'll probably get off. You're not going to. No, that's not what they say. When they say, when you commit a crime in Idaho, you're going to get charged and you're going to get prosecuted. And I think that that's one thing that we as law enforcement executives and professionals really believe in, is that if you violate the law here, we're going to see it all the way through. We could start getting into mandatory minimums and where that applies. I can tell you that from my own experience, drug deals, those who are wise to Idaho's laws, they want to do a drug deal in Oregon. So they want us to drive to Ontario to do the drug deal, and we just won't do it. And there's a very good reason why they want to go all the way to Ontario to make a drug deal, is because they know that Idaho has mandatory minimums and they understand that they're going to go to prison for them. And so they will intentionally drive across the bridge, and that's where they'll want to do the drug deal. That's something that we know happens, and it happens every day because of Idaho's stance and the reputation that we have.
We also have federally deputized police officers as well. I think I was talking to Chief Ingram out of Caldwell, and they do interstate drug busts where they go to Oregon to engage in a drug deal, and then I'm 90% sure he said they bring the individual back to Idaho to face charges. So, and that's an important nuance, specifically because, like, if more people knew that it's like, no. Idaho dudes can come to Oregon. Like, they can go to Washington. You're not as safe as you think. I think that's a beautiful thing, because then it's like, okay, well then the Idaho border would be a lot more safe. And it's like, it's not even like, hey, go 5 miles over there. It's like, no, you got to go a ways out, because they're police that are more than happy to cross the border and bust you in a drug deal.
Sure. When you were saying that, it reminded me a few years ago, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Idaho's hemp laws when they started to take effect a number of years ago.
Not very familiar.
Yeah. So when hemp started kind of coming back and states were legalizing it and it's growing and those kind of things, there was a lot of concern that hemp being transported, they'd be smuggling marijuana.
Sure.
Hemp, right? And we saw, as soon as Oregon started legalizing marijuana, we immediately saw more marijuana showing up in Idaho. But what we also noticed was that because of Idaho's laws and our reputation, is they were making their way around the state of Idaho. So they were in a lot of cases, they were avoiding the state of Idaho when it came to that. And before Idaho passed its own hemp laws, that's where we saw what the hemp traffic, and you could call it trade, where they were starting to move around the state of Idaho just based on our reputation. And so I can tell you that I don't think any law enforcement executive in Idaho wants to minimize that reputation. We're proud of that reputation. We are all about enforcing the law here and keeping our citizens safe.
Where do you think, and first off, thank you. Thank you for what you do. Genuinely, I love it here. I love seeing the cruisers drive by. Again, I'm a big fan of law enforcement. I've had nothing but fantastic experiences here. What do you think, how do mandatory minimums function as a disincentive? Because I know some people are against mandatory minimums, but if we're looking to disincentivize crime, do mandatory minimums help with that, or is it something that doesn't have a big effect on the actual prevalence of crimes?
Yeah, my experience, they do. I talked to folks in other states, and if you can get a really high-priced, good attorney to really lower your charges or make changes or convince a judge to do something different, then people are going to pay for that. Again, like we were talking earlier, like the cartel doesn't necessarily have a budget. They don't have a set of financial numbers that they're aiming to stay within. They've got all the money that they need. And so high-priced attorneys are part of their process. They just know that when they send drug mules around the country, they're going to lose some of them to prison. They just know it. It's a cost of doing business for them. But here in Idaho, there is no opportunity to get a high-priced attorney to get you out of, or get your sentence lessened if that mandatory minimum is there.
This is talking about cartels. What do you think about the Narcan, right? Because some people have said, hey, if individuals engage with methamphetamines and bad stuff, we should not be funding the taxpayer in Idaho should not be funding Narcan in patrol cars and reviving people. That to me seemed like a curious position. It's like, well, okay, I understand that. And like, that's a really hard line for some people. And they're like, if somebody wants to engage in illegal drugs, then they get what they get. But we also have instances Narcan is utilized for somebody, like this terrible example, but a teenager or something who might be experimenting with illegal marijuana, which is not a great idea. And they get something that actually has things like fentanyl laced into it. So they were not intending to ingest fentanyl, right? They just got really bad stuff, or they were maybe trying to buy some, illegal Adderall or something. I don't know, whatever it might be. And all of a sudden you have kids that are overdosing on fentanyl and you have Narcan. What do you think that is, do you think that the prevalence of that or the risk of having somebody unintentionally doing it is sufficient to justify like, hey, we should spend money on Narcan, even, for the teenager and for the drug addict?
I'll let the members of the legislature decide what needs to be funded, right? Like that's their role. But I can tell you that our troopers carry Narcan. And not only have they had to give that to themselves when they've been exposed, or to other troopers or to other law enforcement or to EMTs, and it has saved lives of first responders, but they also have saved the lives of citizens where in the exact scenario that you're talking about, maybe somebody doesn't even realize what they've ingested, and that Narcan saved their life. So it's effective. It works. The funding mechanism behind it, I'll let the legislature decide what needs to be funded.
Yeah, I will too. I have no idea. All of this is so complex in the budgeting and then allocating resources. But again, Idaho does, at least in my mind, the best job in the nation. Colonel, I've had you here for a long time. We've talked about a dump truck and things. Is there anything you want to hit here at the end?
I would just, I can't say enough about the members of the Idaho State Police. And I'm asked quite a bit, what's your favorite part of being the director? I've been the director for 4 months. And my favorite part of being the director is I get to see absolutely amazing people do outstanding things. I'm humbled by what they do, and they do it for people that they don't even know. I had a very cool experience. You got time for me to tell this?
No, you got all the. Yeah. I don't want to be rude. It's a holiday. I got all the time of the world, my guy.
Well, and it even fits the holiday. I was a pretty young trooper. I actually started on the other side of the state over in Idaho Falls, and I had a very smart supervisor. He was my sergeant at the time. He's long since retired. He was smart in that he said, "Hey, have you ever done Shop with a Cop before? And you're familiar with Shop with a Cop?"
No.
The program?
No.
So Shop with a Cop it's pretty much done statewide, but you'll have businesses that will donate money. And for instance, they'll give it to a sheriff's department or a state agency or whatever. And they'll say, hey, bring some children in from the school and then use that money. And they partner them up with a law enforcement officer, and then they go shopping for their family. And it's, it's all paid for, and these businesses donate this money. And oftentimes they reach out to school districts and say, hey, send us the name and addresses of some kids that really could use the help. Maybe kids that don't quite get a Christmas. And so we'll specifically highlight it and find kids that meet that need, and then we'll bring them in. Well, I was asked my very first year on as a trooper to participate in the Shop with a Cop. And my sergeant was very smart in doing this. He recognized a brand new trooper. We want to get them out into the public, get them used to dealing with the public so that not everybody's a criminal. We're there to help. And I remember showing up at this particular event. It was at a Fred Meyer in Idaho Falls. And I was given an envelope, and there was $200 in it, and there were 2 names. They were twin boys, Roger and Reynold. And all I knew is Saturday morning I was showing up there at 8 a.m. And I showed up there at this Fred Meyer, and Roger was there. And I said, hey, I thought you have a brother named Reynold. He said he's not feeling well, so he can't make it in. And so me and Roger, we went through the store and started shopping, and then we get to his brother, and we said, what do you want to get for your brother? Now, this is going to take you way back in time, but the toy of the year that year was this was in 2000 or 2001, is one of the two. Do you remember Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story?
Yeah.
Okay, well, they had a doll that was probably this big, and it was a plastic doll, and its arms moved, and you could push a button. And
it's like, and the wings pop out.
Did you have this toy?
I mean, we have like 3 at my house right now.
All right. So this was like the first year that this thing came out. It was that long ago. And he wanted to get that for his brother in a bad way. And so, Toy Story was the big show. And so they had Toy Story aisles. So we're going down the toys and everything, and we see where that toy should be. And it's empty. They're not there. And I said, well, let's go up to the customer service desk. Maybe they got some in the back. So we go up to the customer service desk. The lady types in some stuff. And remember, we're in Idaho Falls. And she says, there's none here, but there's one in Boise. And, he gets excited, but he also doesn't understand time and distance. And I'm like, bud, there's just no way. Yeah, that thing's 4.5, 5 hours away. There's just no way we can get that. So we go back, and I remember he purchased like this cup and saucer set for his brother. It was a Buzz Lightyear cup and saucer set. And we finish off he goes. And then I remember thinking to myself, can I get that doll? I wonder how I can get that. And I had just went through the police academy with a Boise PD officer, and we were pretty good friends. And I called him and said, hey, is there any way you can run to that Fred Meyer? I will call the store and have him hold it. Is there any way you can run down there and grab that? And so he's like, yeah. So 15, 20 minutes goes by. He calls me back. He says, hey, I'm holding this doll. What do you want me to do with it? I said, great. While you were on the phone, I got a hold of a trooper in Boise. He's going to meet you. And then he ends up meeting him, giving him that trooper in Boise. Trooper calls me from Boise. Hey, I've got this doll, and I don't even know these people. I'm so new, right? And he says, what do you want me to do with this? Great. I've just called a trooper that's in Mountain Home. Is there any way you can drive and meet him halfway?
Oh, my God.
So all of a sudden, the Mountain Home guy calls me. Hey, what do you want me to do? Hey, I'm glad you have that doll. Can you start making your way toward Jerome? I have a trooper that's going to meet you that way. We call this like the Buzz Lightyear run of 2000, right? The Jerome guy gets it. Jerome makes a call. I said, hey, there's a trooper that's headed just toward Pocatello. Can you meet him? So this thing makes its way all the way around. Toward the end of the shift, I'm getting close to the end of my day, and I'm sitting in a crossover right on the interstate just outside of Idaho Falls. And this trooper from Blackfoot finally has this and shows up and he hands me this thing. And I thank him. And by this time, I'd figured out where this family lived. So I made my way over to this home, knocked on the door, and this little boy that I went shopping with earlier, Roger, opens the door, and I'm holding this thing. And his mom comes to the door, and she's so excited. And I said, hey, this is what he wanted to get his brother for Christmas. I'm just going to give it to you. And she says, no, you're going to come in here right now. A trooper in uniform. You have this doll. You're going to come in here right now. I want you to give it to him now. So I go inside, and to say that this kid was a Buzz Lightyear fan just doesn't do it justice. As I walked into the house, I go to his bedroom, and over the door, there was a big life-size painting that the mother had done of Buzz Lightyear. And on the top, it said, you are now entering Star Command, right? Like perfect for this little boy. You walk in his room, and the wallpaper's Buzz Lightyear. His comforter's Buzz Lightyear. There's Buzz Lightyear everywhere. And then it isn't until right then that it dawns on me what I'm walking into is Reynold, his brother, was a little boy that had cancer and was hoping to feel better and to be able to make it to that shop with a cop. I can tell you that of my 26 years, my favorite moment is that hour I spent with that little boy playing with that doll. That 1 hour. And when I first signed on to be a trooper with ISP, I hoped I would make a difference in someone's life, but I always thought that it would be arresting the bad guy or writing the ticket or taking someone to jail. Never did I think it would be an hour with a toy, with a little boy, that would really be my moment in wearing this uniform. I don't know, about 3 or 4 weeks later, I get a call from his mom. She might have heard that I really like peanut butter cookies. And so she makes a plate of cookies for me. She comes down to the office and she says, I want you to know how excited I was that you're able to do that. And I said, no, it's not a problem. Thanks for the cookies. I said, how's he doing? And she said, that's why I'm here. He actually passed away a few days ago. But what you need to know is that when I asked him what he wanted to be buried with, he picked that doll. And you need to know that. That has impacted me and motivated me for 26 years. And I can tell you that I have tried really hard to instill that into the people that have either worked for me or worked with me, that it isn't, trying to be the big badge heavy cop out there that's out there making a difference. You can make a difference with somebody by just simply treating them as a human being and spending time with them. And if we can all come to that conclusion together, that's what changes things. That, to go back to your earlier thing, is what keeps Idaho, Idaho. Is how we treat people.
Thank you for coming.